will the Electoral Commission requirements take? How long is he going to leave the House in purgatory? He gave a commitment that if we went past the 31st of October, there would be a general election. And yet on the Moore programme on Sunday, the Shadow Brexit Secretary said he wanted further delay in order to have a second referendum. So when is he going to accept the Prime Minister's challenge? When is he going to have a general election? Or are we going to have, as the Shadow Brexit Secretary said, more dither, more delay and more shirking of his responsibilities?
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, could my right honourable friend try to ensure the government stops giving this sort of sacred quality to the date of October the 31st, which is a really rather silly point, which has intruded into the extremely complicated arguments we're having on this whole issue, although I personally would be quite happy if we could conclude a withdrawal agreement along the lines the Prime Minister is proposing by 31st of October, if we could do it properly. But the date was not selected by the British public or the British government. It was a compromise in the EU between President Macron and the rest, and was plucked out of the air. So will he agree with me that what matters is we get the right withdrawal agreement, carried with the tenuous majority the government may have, through second reading and third reading, so its form is actually settled, and then we can proceed in a way which future generations, if we get it right, or if we get it wrong, will regard as much more important than whether we actually made it for a particular day in October 2019.
But the reality, Mr. Speaker, is the date was set by the previous European Council, and it is not a unilateral decision for the UK Parliament as to whether that date is changed. Now, previously in this House, the Father of the House has said what mattered was avoiding no deal. The Prime Minister has secured a deal that does that. So what matters now is that we end the uncertainty for businesses, the uncertainty for citizens, and actually deliver on the deal the Prime Minister has negotiated, one agreed by the EU 27 as well, and we get Brexit done.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I congratulate the Leader of the Opposition for lodging this question. But of course, it's a question to the Prime Minister, and it's a question about the Prime Minister's behaviour. Where is he? Where is the respect that the Prime Minister is showing to this House? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is utterly humiliated by his defeat on Saturday, a defeat that saw this House reject his unfair anti-democratic deal. A defeat, Mr. Speaker, that has forced the Prime Minister to send a letter to the European Union Council requesting a deal. But what did the Prime Minister do? He sent a letter, not on headed paper, and unsigned. Pathetic. Can I ask if the Prime Minister is used to sending unsigned letters in his capacity as Prime Minister, and if so, how many? And I want a direct answer to that question.
Anonymous letters.
But I think we know the answer. Because his behaviour lacks dignity. It lacks respect. It is not becoming of any Prime Minister. Once again, the Prime Minister has shown himself to be unworthy of the office he holds. Mr. Speaker, I have with me a copy of a joint letter sent from the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales to President Tusk, properly addressed with their official letterheads and duly signed. The Prime Minister should take note. That is a lesson on how to behave, because his actions don't just show disrespect to this House, but to the court in Scotland, but to President Tusk himself. Despite the Prime Minister's childish games of sending a contrary letter, of course, the SNP is pleased to see that the grown-ups in room, namely the European Council, are now considering the extension. An extension that must be secured to protect our interests from the economic oblivion if we were to exit the European Union on a no-deal Brexit. Mr. Speaker, I join with the Leader of the Opposition to express the SNP's outrage that the Prime Minister has instructed his government to publish the withdrawal bill without securing adequate time for parliamentary debate and scrutiny. Once again, this Conservative government is showing disregard for democracy. It is absolutely imperative that representatives here are able to do our jobs and scrutinise the legislation, given the magnitude of the implications. So I say to the Prime Minister, through the Secretary that's here, if he's not afraid of democratic debate, secure the extension and let's give the time for full scrutiny of the bill. And let me ask this, if he's so sure that the people are with him, will he confirm today that he will seek support for this bill from the Scottish Parliament, who must give consent first?
Well, the crux of the issue is the Prime Minister has complied with the law. But it is right that alongside that he sets out his well-known views, and that should not come as a surprise to the Right Honourable Gentleman any more than it should to any other member of this House. But what is unworthy, Mr. Speaker, is to have referendums and to ignore the result. Which is a position of the Right Honourable Gentleman, not just in terms of the referendum in 2014, but also in terms of the referendum in 2016. After more than 1,200 days since the referendum, the one thing I don't think this House has lacked is opportunity to debate the issues contained in the withdrawal agreement bill. And the withdrawal bill will be published, it is with the House, in order for that debate to happen. So it's time for the House to get on to that debate, to back the bill, to get Brexit done, and to get on to the domestic priorities, the record investment in our health service, the extra 20,000 police officers that we're recruiting, and levelling up all parts of the United Kingdom as part of a strong economic delivery.
Sir John Redwood.
I'm glad the government wishes to base our future relationship with the EU on comprehensive free trade agreement. So will the government get on and table one and show urgency in trying to get one? Because the sooner we can get one, the more reassuring it will be in Northern Ireland. And the public, who are heartily sick of all this, don't want to waste another 15 months. And Mr. Speaker, may I personally thank you for avoiding Groundhog Day today. I heard all the arguments on Saturday. I don't think I need to hear them again.
Well, I agree with my right honourable friend. We need to get on to the future relationship. The House has been debating endlessly the winding down provisions, which is what is contained in the withdrawal agreement bill. And what the political declaration sets out is a clear framework for a best-in-class free trade agreement, and we need to pass the bill in order to get on to doing that.
Jay Swinson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was withering in his criticism of the first Brexit deal, and yet he voted for it. He said that no Conservative PM should ever accept a border down the Irish Sea, and yet he has. And he said he would never ask for an extension of Article 50, and yet he sent the letter doing just that. If the Prime Minister is allowed to change his mind, surely the government should give the public the opportunity to do the same by putting their Brexit deal to a people's vote.
I think it's somewhat ironic to have a question about changing minds from the Liberal Democrats, who were the first party to call for an in-out referendum, and who now want a people's vote on the basis of ignoring the people's vote that we've had.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The urgent question is introduced by the Leader of the Opposition, which is somewhat unusual. May I refer my right honourable friend to a bill which was introduced in 1997 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition with the Right Honourable Tony Benn, which says that the sections 2 and 3 of the European Community Act 1972 are hereby repealed, but the European Court of Justice shall have no effect in the United Kingdom. And would he also recall the number of times, which, as far as I'm concerned, was indefinite, when the Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition went through the lobby with me on every single occasion relating to European matters? Does he accept that this really does demonstrate a monumental, not only mere U-turn, but a monumental degree of lack of memory and a lack of understanding of what the withdrawal bill is all about and the referendum itself.
Well, my rightable friend has always stuck to his principles. The reality is the leader of the opposition cannot even stick to his own manifesto.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't the Brexit Secretary agree with me that the Prime Minister has a problem with veracity? He told us that he would rather be dead in a ditch than sign the letter and sign the letter. He told us that there would be no border in the Irish Sea, and then he negotiated a border in the Irish Sea. Why on earth should we ever believe a single thing that this Prime Minister says?
Well, the Prime Minister didn't sign the letter, so I think the issue with veracity was actually in the question.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Would my right friend agree that what the recipients of the letter and other EU member states and indeed the country want to know is whether or not the agreement that they have reached with the Prime Minister commands the majority support of this House? And how does he propose to explain to them that now, on a second day of the House of Commons meeting, we are still unable to discover that?
I very much share my right honourable friend's frustration. That exactly is the question that will be posed in capitals. They have reached a deal with the government. They want to see the UK leave in a smooth and orderly way. That is what their citizens want to see, is what UK citizens in Europe want to happen, and the sooner we get on and do it, the better.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's reported that the Secretary of State this morning told the House of Lords Select Committee that under this agreement, goods leaving Northern Ireland for the rest of the United Kingdom will require an exit summary declaration to be submitted. Can he confirm for the House that such declarations have to be made when goods leave the customs territory of the European Union? If so, how does that square with Article 4 of the Protocol, which says that Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom? It's either part of the European Union or the United Kingdom. It can't be both.
Well, what I was referring to in those remarks was, in line with international obligations, some practical information will be needed to be provided electronically on the movement of goods from west to east. However, the government will be considering the process during the implementation period.
Craig McKinley.
Mr. Speaker, can I just say on the floor of this House now, I have zero and absolutely no respect for the Ben Surrender Act. I have no respect by the means by which it was brought to the House and the order paper was taken over. I have no respect that it had 4 hours debate with 1 day's notice. I have no respect. Now, Mr. Speaker, you were not in the chair that afternoon, but the manner in which manuscript amendments were being debated before they were available, this was a shambolic act brought by those who do not want to respect Brexit. The government should be in control of the order paper, and if others don't want that, they can lay a vote of no confidence that they will not do. I really wonder, Mr. Speaker, what is this urgent question for? Is it an argument that somehow the government should have delivered a letter that was gold trimmed on a sort of a sequined velvet cushion to the Commission? Can the Secretary of State confirm that the letter has obviously been treated as genuine and is being dealt with in the appropriate way by the Council of Ministers, much as I would have preferred that the government and the Prime Minister had ignored this shambolic Ben Act?
Well, the Ben legislation, as he well knows, was designed to prevent a no-deal exit. The Prime Minister was told that changing the backstop was impossible. He delivered it. He was told the withdrawal agreement text couldn't be changed. He did so. We now have a deal that the House can pass. I hope members across the House will do so with the withdrawal agreement bill in order that we can leave on the 31st of October, as citizens and businesses around the country want us to do, and to get on with it.
Mr. Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Minister realises that I could never get angry with him. He's always been, he and I have always had very good relationships, and I trust him a very long way. but can I ask you, can I beg him to talk to the Prime Minister about this whole sort of, it's almost a philosophy of get on with it. You know, we must get this done, get on with it. Would he agree with me? It's our sacred duty, not just to get on with it, to make sure what the deal is, the quality of it, actually serves our constituents, because they depend on us for their health, their welfare, their future, their prosperity. So we must take this business seriously and slowly. Get on with it is a nasty jibe. Stop it.
Well, firstly, can I thank the honourable gentleman for the kind words with which he prefaced his question, and I very much have always enjoyed working with him on that basis. In terms of the detail, he's right. We do need to get that detail right. But we also need to be clear as to what the scope of the withdrawal agreement bill is. It is to implement the deal, the international treaty that has been reached. It is not to determine the future relationship, which the House, through the withdrawal agreement bill, will have a lot of opportunity in terms of the negotiation mandate to discuss and get right. So we need to implement the treaty. We need to do that through what has been agreed with the EU in the form of the withdrawal agreement bill, and then get on to the debates which I look forward to having with him on the terms of the free trade agreement as we move forward with that deal.
Ben Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if my honourable friend shares my concern that two members of opposition frontbench parties now have said it's not good enough simply to police the Prime Minister's actions through the courts. They now also want to police his thoughts and opinions as well. I think that's quite a sinister preview of what life might be like under a Labour government if it were to happen. Can he confirm my understanding of the process for the following week and the legislation, and perhaps for my constituents' clarity, that if members opposite bring forward amendments that are not compatible with the agreement that we've made with the European Union, all that will achieve is not to have the outcome of those amendments, it will just frustrate and prevent us from passing a deal and leaving on time.
Well, on the detail in terms of the next steps, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, will make a business statement after the urgent questions, and I would not want to preempt that. But on the wider point, he's absolutely right. The Prime Minister has met his legal obligation. That has been recognised by the President of the European Court, the European Union, and what we now need to do is implement the withdrawal agreement bill, get Brexit done, and get on to the free trade agreement, which the honourable gentleman referred to earlier.
Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the fact that despite all the malarkey and green ink letters and spin on Saturday night, the European Union have accepted the request for an extension. But does it concern the Secretary of State that in the court action raised in Scotland, in which I acknowledge the support of Dale Vince, despite the fact that the Prime Minister, the Attorney General and the Advocate General have all assured the court that the Prime Minister will obey the Benn Act and asked the court to dismiss the action, despite those promises and assurances, the court have seen fit to continue the action to make sure that the Prime Minister keeps his promise.
Well, it's not for a Minister of the Crown to comment on any live court proceedings, but to follow the lexicon of the Honourable Lady, what would be malarkey is for claimants to send letters before the publication of the correspondence that address the issue that was sought in the earlier judgment.
Neil O'Brien.
Recently returned to the House after 2 weeks paternity leave following the birth of my. Thank you very much. Following the birth of my son, my beautiful son Arthur, I've returned to find even better the Prime Minister secured a wonderful Brexit deal, which I look forward to voting.
Name. You want to know the name of the child?
Arthur, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend reassure me that he will now crack on and get the legislation through so that we can get Brexit done and not be still talking about this when Arthur is old enough to drive?
Let me be the first to congratulate the honourable gentleman on the birth of Arthur, and we wish him a long and happy and healthy life. And I had noticed the absence of the honourable gentleman, and it's very good to welcome him back to the chamber. Secretary of State.
Well, there may have been delays in getting Brexit delivered, but I'm delighted that Arthur has been delivered, and I'm sure I speak for the whole House in both offering our congratulations and also wishing Arthur every success for the future. He's absolutely right. I think up and down the country there is huge frustration both amongst our constituents, but also with businesses that want an end to the uncertainty, want to see a deal reached, recognise it's in the country's interest to leave in a smooth and orderly way, and see that the Prime Minister has agreed a deal that is brought to the House. It's now for the House to pass the legislation to enable us to move forward and to get on to the other priorities we want to do.
Ian Murray. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have received thousands of emails since the Prime Minister brought back his deal on Thursday from constituents who are asking me to tell them what the impact of this deal will be on their jobs, livelihoods and future prosperity for the communities in which they live. I am unable to do so because the government are refusing to publish an economic impact assessment. What is the answer to them? Will GDP go down? Will jobs and unemployment go up? What is the answer?
Well, the answer is to listen to the Bank of England Governor, who says that getting this deal passed will be a boost to our economy, because there's a huge amount of investment ready to be released into the economy if we get this deal passed. The voices of business up and down the country want a decision, want the UK to move forward in a smooth and orderly way, and the best way of addressing the concerns of his constituents is to get Brexit done.
Mr. Speaker, at the Dover front line, we have long been ready for any eventuality, deal or no deal, to leave the European Union. But what we now need is certainty, because uncertainty, and it's dragging on, is becoming economically damaging. So has he had any representations from party opposites about how they'll assist with getting on with Brexit, or has he only ever heard, as I have heard, that they simply want to cancel Brexit and defy the British people?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend that what we need is certainty, and what the Prime Minister's deal offers is exactly that. And what we have from the benches opposite is more dither, more delay, a desire for a second referendum, and yet no clarity as to how long that second referendum would take.
Ms. Leslie.
I understand the Minister's political reasons for the reluctance around the Ben Act, but it is the law of the land. And it's important, because I'm worried from what he's said, that he seems to give the impression it's only about sending a letter. It's more than that. Section 1, subsection 4 of the Ben Act requires that the Prime Minister, quote, must seek to obtain an extension. So it's not just a matter of sending a letter. He must seek to obtain that extension. And that involves using the Prime Minister's best endeavours, his good faith, in trying to... It must... There's a duty on the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, that he must seek to obtain an extension. So will the Minister acknowledge that the legal duties on the Prime Minister are not simply about sending an unsigned letter?
Well said.
I mean, the reality is this is Parliament's letter, and the Prime Minister has sent Parliament's letter. But he's been clear that he will comply with the law. He has complied with the law. That is reflected in the comments of figures such as Lord Panic. But he is also entitled to express his views, and that's exactly what he's done.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say that lots of my constituents in East Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire think that what happened on Saturday was a Westminster bubble, smarty pants little stitch-up to stop us leaving the European Union on October 31st. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? That's exactly what it was. And can I say to him, the reason why October the 31st is so important is because so many people in this country, particularly across the north of England, have figured out what's going on in here. There is an attempt to play for time, to delay, delay and delay, with the one and simple aim, which is to overturn the referendum result that people in here never accepted and never had any intention of accepting.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The House said that it didn't believe the Prime Minister would get a deal. He did get a deal. They said they wanted a meaningful vote. Then when the opportunity is presented to have a meaningful vote, they make it meaningless. It's time for those games to stop, for us to get a deal through, and the opportunity to do so is to support the withdrawal agreement bill that legislates on the deal the Prime Minister has reached.
Catherine McKinnell.
Speaker, the Chancellor has responded to the Treasury Select Committee's request of 3 months ago, asking for updated economic analysis of the free trade agreement that the government is pursuing. the Chancellor has acknowledged that the current economic analysis does not correspond with previous analysis produced by the Government, but has not indicated any commitment to provide updated economic analysis. He appears to think it's acceptable for MPs to vote blindly on a potential free trade agreement. Either he has something to hide, or he thinks that's an acceptable way for MPs to be left in the dark.
Well, the reality is the House will have lots of opportunities to debate and instruct in terms of the negotiating mandate how those negotiations are taken forward. I mean, the reality is that any modelling for the future would have to take on board what is the future direction of the Commission under the new leadership. It would have to consider what actions the UK government would take in response. It would have to model what would happen elsewhere in the world, for example, in terms of China and the US. So the reality is one can't do a forecast on these things, but it's right that the House will have an opportunity to negotiate these and to discuss these as part of shaping the mandate for the future.
Peter Bone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Leader of the Opposition was slightly wrong in his question when he said the letter takes no deal off the table. That's impossible, because it's up to the other nations of the European Union whether they grant an extension or not. The only way, sir, you can definitely take no deal off the table is, as someone else once said, is vote for this deal, and that's exactly what this House should do. Does the Secretary agree?
I very much agree with my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to him for his support for the deal. And the reality is